This is Scraptail, a thief and a rat. What you're seeing on the screen is the current prototype for the game named after her. In this game, you'll have to pull off heists either silently or loudly to gather money and parts for your bionic tail and become the greatest thief the underground has ever seen. But Scraptail's story doesn't start here. Let's rewind. It is July 2021. Me and my friend Bernard are fresh out of university and we're looking for a new project to develop while we are in between jobs. We've been friends since we were about 4 years old, and our childhood is filled with memories of games like Jak and Daxter, Ratchet & Clank, and Sly Cooper. I, specifically, had recently gone through a Sly Cooper marathon at the time, and as usual, it hurt me to know that Sly was left and forgotten in ancient Egypt.
And so our conversation for brainstorming kind of went like this.
Hey, I really want to do a Sly spiritual successor.
That is way too ambitious.
Yeah, it is quite ambitious, isn't it?
You know, there's only 2 of us. And
No, yeah.
We need something like more arcadey. What if we made Sly but arcadey? Okay, how would that even work? What if we made it just like focus on the heists and make it like very replayable? You mean like a menu where you choose a heist and you just do it over and over again?
Yeah.
Isn't that just Payday? Oh my god, it's exactly like Payday.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
I don't think that's a bad thing though.
And so, Project Rat was born, and we got to work. We wanted to have just a simple example heist. You could grab onto stuff, swing, climb, and punch. That's it. We wanted to prove that a game with Sly Cooper mechanics, but only focused on heists like Payday, could work. Another idea we got from Payday was that we wanted to give the player the option to either go through the heist silently or loudly. Now, I am a Unity developer, but Bernard is an Unreal Engine artist, and so he asked me to switch to Unreal. I agreed, thinking that a simple idea like this could easily be learned. I was wrong, obviously, but we still managed to get a good chunk of mechanics, visuals, and ideas onto the paper. Throughout July and August, life happened, we thought of some safer options and ideas to make money, and the rat was eventually shelved. Throughout the rest of 2021 and the majority of 2022, Project Rat was always stuck in the back of our minds, popping up on the occasional conversation, or whenever one of us just really had the urge to make it. But that was it. Then came October 2022. I had been mildly addicted to Brandon Sanderson's works for a little over a year, and it was finally time I read Mistborn. Throughout my reading of the first book, I just kept imagining how cool it would be to fly around a city with abilities of pushing steel and pulling iron as described in those books. They essentially used metals to fly around the city. It's a very complex system, so I'm not gonna lose too much time explaining it, but essentially I talked about this with a friend who also read a bit of Mistborn, and he agreed, giving me some ideas for a simple fan game prototype. I had already made a prototype for another of Sanderson's works, so I thought,
why not? It'll be a fun experience.
After a couple of days of playing around, I had a pretty good base for fast-paced parkouring that a thief could use to hop around a city. But as I was developing this, something clicked in my head. This was the final piece of the puzzle. This is what Project Rat was missing. At the time, a year before, we had forgotten to sprinkle some Dishonored into the original mix. Sly and Payday are great for simple thieving, but those games have normal characters who use weapons and gadgets to get through their heists. Dishonored, on the other hand, allows you to be stealthy but also deadly with a power trip that I don't think I've seen in any other game. Jumping around, blade in hand, blinking from one ledge to the other. You're essentially just a silent shadow that can go through the whole level either unnoticed or leaving a trail of bodies behind. No matter which one you picked, the game made you feel awesome either way. Now, don't get me wrong, Sly was quirky and fun, but I never felt powerful while playing that character. Same thing goes for games like Styx, Ghost of a Tale, or even Plague Tale. All of these games are amazing, but the characters are not meant to be powerful. That's the whole point, it's their DNA. Payday does make you feel powerful, but not in a superhero kind of way, just in a psycho kind of way. So, with this thought, I could now see clearly the game that Project Rat was meant to be. So eventually, I gave in, and I gave myself 2 weeks to make a viable prototype for Project Rat. So, before I bore you all with the technical details, let me give you a rundown of what we have decided for this game. It's going to be a third-person game with a movement very similar to Sly's, so you'll be focusing on hopping from building to building, climbing pipes and ledges, and crawling in the sewers to traverse the level. But you'll also have your metal tail that can hold 2 upgrades at once. Each of those upgrades will have 2 opposing abilities, giving you 4 abilities in total per level. These upgrades are the selling point of the game. They are meant to make the player just feel awesome. Imagine equipping an extendable tail upgrade to reach new places and traverse that level much faster than before, or even a sharp tail upgrade, for example, that gives you a new combat moveset while active, or hell, combine these two to make an extendable sharp tail that can kill enemies from afar. This game is gonna be so cool! Besides the tail, Scraptail would also have regular equipment. You'd be able to choose a silent combo like daggers and throwing knives, or a loud combo such as swords and a crossbow, with explosive arrows, for example. I haven't really decided on the setting of the game yet. I was trying not to think too much about it until I confirmed that we were going forward with the idea, so I don't really know if there would be things like guns and grenades in this game, or if we would be sticking to simple daggers and crossbows. But I think you get the idea of this weapons section. This would be much more heavily inspired on Payday than any other games, I think. And that would be the main loop of the game to begin with. You perform heists on greater and richer houses and places to gather money for your upgrades and equipment. All of this until you become the greatest thief of the underground. Now, obviously, this is very bare bones because, again, we're a small team, so we wanted to keep things very simple and arcadey. Later on, if the game goes well, then yes, absolutely, we would love to add a more meaningful story. There are still many questions about the direction of the game, but we know what we wanted for our core and foundation. And with that, my 2 weeks had started. So, first, I duplicated my Mistborn project and adjusted it to fit the setting of the Rap project. I grabbed all the assets Bernard made over a year ago, along with some others that I had bought from the asset store, and started planning out my levels. I really wanted this prototype to have the audience in mind. You have no idea how many times I've made prototypes to show my friends, just to have them completely not understand the game. So I made tutorials as I developed my mechanics. This ended up being a great approach since it allowed me to split my goals into small victories, and it forced me to make things extremely modular. For example, in the movement tutorial, the very first one, the player shouldn't have access to the tail abilities or combat, so I was forced to develop my code with that in mind, and now I can just add and remove mechanics as I see fit. During this time, Bernard was too busy to help me out with the art, so I had to try my best with random assets that I found. I polished up the movement, added an interaction system, and implemented the first tail upgrade, the extendable tail. I turned the iron pulling mechanic from Mistborn into a tail pulling mechanic and added tail pushing as well. And yes, at the moment, the tail is just a cylinder that extends. I'm a programmer, please leave me alone. I spent some time refining this mechanic. I really wanted the player to have that power drive, which in this case was meant to make them feel fast and agile with this upgrade. Again, I really wanted these upgrades to be the main focus of the game, so I tried to focus as much as I could on them. Even when I moved on to combat, I wanted to add tail pulling and pushing into the mix, which was an interesting experience. But eventually, I got to a happy place for this proof of concept. It is extremely far from perfect, but I think it gets the point across. The combat itself began as a simple, combo-based hitbox system, just like Slice. But then, I remembered how boring Slice combat is compared to some other options nowadays. Slice combat was charming because of the fun graphics, music, and sound effects, but when you strip it down to its bare bones, the button mashing just becomes old quick. That changes a bit with gadgets down the line, but I think my point still stands. I wanted my combat to feel quick and satisfying on its own. The tail is just supposed to enhance that. I began thinking about how I would like the combat to feel when I decided to do a heist the loud way with 10 guards just surrounding me. So this made me think of the combat in games like Batman, Spider-Man, Shadow of Mordor, Kingdom Hearts, Final Fantasy, the list goes on, including this obscure Zorro game. Now, I could be wrong here because I haven't played all of these games, but it seems to me that most of them implement their own variation of a type of combat called free flow combat. Mix and Jam has an amazing video on this, which I tried to follow, but something still feels stiff about my implementation, and I don't really know what it is. Maybe I rushed through the combat and the mechanics just were poorly implemented? Or am I just missing some flair? Maybe some particle effects, proper animations, and camera shakes? I thought about blaming it on the boring AI, but nope, the combat should be fun even if you're just practicing against standing dummies. I know damn well how much time I've spent in some games training rooms, so I don't know. Any insight in the comments would be amazing. At this point, I had spent way too much time with the combat, so I just moved on to implementing some very basic tail pushing and tail pulling to be used on enemies, and then moved on to other things that needed to be done. I implemented my AI, as well as some tools to help me place them more easily in the world. I obviously had to implement my stealth mechanics as soon as possible, as that is one of the cores of the game. Things like passing enemies unseen, stealing things from them, and being able to go through crawl spaces were my top priority, which, compared to the combat, these were all very straightforward to implement. And so, my tutorials were basically complete. Now, I just needed an example heist for the player to try out all of their abilities at once. I didn't want to spend time thinking about settings or motivations, so I went with the most stereotypical heist idea. You're robbing a museum that is full of guards and you have to steal a big ring that is locked away. That's it. During the development of this section, I made changes to some systems and improved others. For example, up until this point, the player still only had the extendable tail ability, and it was hard-coded into the character. So my first order of operations was to make this replaceable. And this was one of the first development streams I did. We first began by making the UI, allowing us to just swap in an upgrade's data for another's to change the look of the UI. And from there, we went ahead and applied the same principles to the tail's logic as well. To test this out, I just implemented a quick sharp tail upgrade, as I mentioned before, which doesn't do anything right now besides spit out debug messages. But for now, that's a win. And then here we go. The player can now equip whatever upgrades they want, and these are easily modular and modifiable. Setting this up like this kinda went against my whole do first, think later philosophy for this prototype, but I think this was one of those mechanics where it was crucial we set it up properly early on in case we do go ahead with the project. I also had to refine the pulling and pushing system a little bit, since this is based on the mass of the thing that you are pushing or pulling. Now, if you have read Mistborn, then you understand why this is. Essentially, if you pull on a big rock, then you get pulled towards the rock. But if you pull a small rock, then the small rock is pulled towards you. Same thing with pushing. So I really wanted this to be very modular so that I could simply add a pullable script to an object and I could easily pull them. Doesn't matter if it's a loot, if it's a character, or if it's something that the player is pulled towards. So I spent some time developing this and I think I've found a very happy medium for now. It was also at this point implemented some more trivial mechanics, such as being able to lockpick certain containers in exchange for extra cash. And I also wanted the big loot to be a bag that you must carry to some sort of drop zone. Now, I don't want this to be as unforgiving as Sly's fetch quests were, so I'm leaning more towards how Payday did it. With that done, and with all the systems in place, this is our final result of the game so far. And that, folks, is where we're at. I'm really excited about this project, and I think it could really be a great game. If you are as excited about it as we are, please consider supporting us on Patreon. I love this idea, but I also have a job, and until Bernard joins me again, I am just one man. Luckily, I am a freelancer, so the more support I get for this game, the more time I can spend on it. If you just want to keep up with the development, you can subscribe to this channel or watch me develop this game live on Twitch. On stream, I also do any requested tutorials, so feel free to stop by and hang out. That is all I have for you guys today. I'm not sure how frequent these updates are going to be. It really depends on how the game is received, but I hope they're frequent. I'll see you all soon.